back to 10,000 Voices. I am Sybil Stewart. If this is your first episode, so glad to have you. Today I have got another phenomenal entrepreneur here, Dr. Stephanie Kirkland. How are you today?
I am doing great. Just excited to be here with you.
I am so excited to have you here. So a little bit about Dr. Stephanie Kirkland. She is a transformational leader with over 20 years of experience in personal and professional leadership development and training. Her background is in psychology with a minor in religion. She's also got a master's degree in organizational leadership, and then she's a doctor of education in organizational leadership as well. She is passionate about people who can unlock their potential success. The focus of her work is around senior executives, emerging leaders, and talking about identity-centered coaching, competencies, emotional intelligence, cognitive and behavioral strategies, and developing personal communication skills. So I was really excited to talk to you because a lot of the ladies on my show talk a lot about their workplace experiences, the challenges that they've been having, and feeling like, I saw an article the other day, the first, the few, or the only.
Wow.
So I'm curious, how does your background and your model tie into connecting to that demographic and that population?
Well, the work that I do for that community really is centered around this identity-centered leadership model. My research is really around women who are the only or who are kind of singled out or in cultural spaces where they're the minority. And so my research is, how do we decenter prototypical leadership norms and then normalize? And my focus was African-American women's leadership style and modality. And so a lot of times what happens in organizations is we kind of fall into the pattern of the prototype of what a leader looks like or how we're supposed to show up in spaces, not recognizing or embracing the fact that we actually have our own leadership modality or way of showing up. And so as a result of that, we feel pressure, we feel othered. We can get stressed out. We can feel like, is it me? Is it my issue? Am I the only one thinking this way? And so my work around that community is your identity, who you are, how you show up in spaces. Your uniqueness is the value, and not to reduce what that is, but to understand what it is that you're dealing with in your spaces.
Exactly. But when we think about the modalities, is that something you specifically developed, or is this more of a widely held concept that people are just maybe unfamiliar with?
Well, what's interesting, right? Like when I was doing my research, what I found is around African-American women, we don't even realize we have one, right? And so we kind of fall into this understanding of what the prototype is, which is white men and white women. And so because we have never been taught that we have a modality, or we have been taught that the generic modality is how everyone is supposed to show up, then we don't understand what that is. So my quest was to talk to successful African-American women, child, who didn't have DEI. And now what did that look like for you? How did you show up? What did that mean for you? And what did you have to navigate? And so there were 12 competencies that literally showed up for these women with regards to their success. And so my framework, which is called Identity Dynamics Leadership, was looking at these competencies, teaching them to the women, making sure that they can grow and elevate with these competencies, and then develop their own. That's so important. Your unique identity framework for how you show up in spaces.
Yes. I love the competency-based framework. I think that is so important to have a baseline for how we function in the world. But in practical terms, how does one then formulate their personal identity with the societal pressures? The stereotypical norms are expected of us to be the angry Black female in the room. How do we then adapt and then modify that which
Mm-hmm.
we know we are challenged with.
So there is this research study called the Crooked Room. And what's powerful about this research study is that what they did was they had a crooked room, and then they began to put people in the room to see where, if they were field dependent, if they allowed their environments to control how they showed up in that narrative. And what they found out was that there were some people who were field dependent, and there were some people who were independent of what the room was doing. So part of my conversation with women with regards to dealing with their crooked room, you heard that, Sybil, their crooked room, is to acknowledge, one, that it's crooked, and two, you are normal. How you show up is normal. And you are dealing with a crooked room. You are dealing with an understanding. You are dealing with an ideology of dominance. You're dealing with binary thinking. And what I've noticed is when women really have language, and when women have understanding about why they're showing up and why this is happening and what's going on, they build a confidence in themselves that it ain't me. It ain't me, right? I got this. I know who I am, right? And so then that confidence brings another way of engagement in these spaces. So when someone says something like, "Oh, you're just angry." No, I'm not angry. I'm just being direct. Can you tell me what that means? So now that you have language, now you know what microaggressions are. Now you have a way to navigate in those spaces and not feel like you're locked in, right? Now you can have direct conversations in a way that supports who you are and how you show up, and then gives credence to what that looks like for you. And understand that your assimilation will not change the environment.
Yes, absolutely, it won't. The other thing, though, and I think we talked about this before, is do we then ever, based on your research, do we then ever really experience imposter syndrome, right? That's the new buzz term.
Yeah.
Don't subscribe to imposter syndrome, but with this research in mind, is that really possible to exist, or is that something else that the light bulb hasn't gone off, or we don't have the language, or we haven't embraced our true identity yet?
I think it's about language, because we are having these experiences, and because we don't have language to express what it is that we're experiencing. So when we hear things like imposter syndrome, you're being othered, and never really look into really what was that research about, right? The research was centered on white women. There were no people of any other community or even other marginalization in the study. The study was centered on a particular group, a particular education class, right? So what has happened is, because it sounds like you, and because you don't know how to describe your experience, then you kind of navigate to a language that seems like it represents you. But the truth of the matter is, women of color are not or do not deal with imposter syndrome. What we're dealing with is that narrative of marginalization, right? We're dealing with societal racism. We're dealing with race and gender racism. And when we have language, then we can go, oh, I don't. Because, one of the things that I was, when I teach that class is, if you look at our historical and cultural context as Black women, we are taught to be confident in our own narratives with the people and the women who are in our spaces. And part of the conversation of imposter syndrome is you don't know who you are. You don't know how you feel. You think that people are going to find you out. I don't know too many sisters who don't know how they show up and who they are. Do you?
Know exactly how we're feeling. Even
Yes.
if I don't say the words to you, correct, I know exactly what this is.
Correct.
It may or may not be angry. It may or may not be frustration, but I have a working vocabulary. I just might not be prepared to share with you, because correct, culturally I've also been taught to not share, because correct, that baseline, that barrier doesn't belong to you. Mm-hmm. Those boundaries I set early and often.
Yes. And then we also have to look at, culturally, we deal with what we call societal shame, right? Or we deal with, things that have been taught to us as defense mechanisms. We have cross language for, right? So, we were taught to be confident, but that confidence was defense. It wasn't really true confidence. So now we have to kind of separate. Okay, I was taught to stand up for myself and to be strong and to, be self-reliant. All of that language that we have adopted as being Black women really is language of defense and not truly language of independence and greatness. So now we have to kind of, desegregate, pull that stuff apart. Is this really confidence or is this defense, right? What am I protecting myself or am I really showing up? Am I angry for real because of what's happening to me? And then now, how do I shift that dynamic? So now we have to have an identity conversation with ourselves, right? What is my truth? How do I want to show up? Is that something that I want a part of my narrative? What does that look like as I create scripts around the conversations that actually adapt to my space?
What do I want to create? That's my mantra. What do you want to create? And if it does not align with what I believe I'm here to create, then I start challenging it and questioning it. But that's even a new practice for me. That's not something I grew up doing because I didn't grow up in a place to challenge the space. I was told to show up, be quiet, take notes, and then return.
Yes.
That was the mission.
That was the mission. And think about it. That was also a cultural narrative that we was taught as a defense mechanism. Back in the slavery times, right? When a woman was strong and confident and beautiful and she stepped into her greatness, that was fearful for a mother. Why? Because her daughter was getting ready to be sold because of that. And so then we have mothers, right? Context being important. And now we hear the language, and oh, you smelling yourself. You need to quiet that down. You need to be humble. You need to, you need to do something with that. But that context of savory is no longer existent now, but the conversation is. And so now generationally, something that we have to break, like you said, now you're practicing a new context, right? And intentionally and in purpose, because before we just accepted that that's what we were told. We accepted, oh, am I being sassy? Oh, I'm talking too much. Oh, and so now we're living again an identity centered in a context that was not our own. And so now we're showing up in spaces fighting. Am I supposed to be confident? Am I supposed to be angry? Am I supposed to be, you know what I'm saying? Because no one ever separated it for us. And that's the power of identity-centered leadership. I am making a decision about what I want and how I want to show up and how do I shape that, like your word, create.
Yes. And once I make that decision, and I try to tell anybody I'm mentoring, advising, is once I make that decision, I've got to own the consequences, whatever they are.
Whatever they are. Whatever they are.
Because it's going to happen. There is a consequences for decision or indecision.
Correct.
Because indecision is also a choice that you're then making. Another thing we talked about before is you said the typology, the modality of the Black female mirrors white male, but it's seen differently in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit more about the similarities in leadership style that you're seeing and how they're overlapping?
Yes, when you look at trait theory, right, because that was also a modality that we used for a long time when we talked about what leadership was and what it looked like in spaces. And so research actually shows that African-American women and white men's leadership style is exactly the same. The only difference is we are nurturers as well as we are democratic. And so when you look at the white male leadership style, they're more authoritarian and they don't have the context of nurture, right? And so what is so powerful is we as Black women, we have all of the styles, right? We are a combination of what prototypical norms say is the exceptional leader. And we got two extra. We're a nurturer, right? And we're democratic. But what happens in the workplace is we are defined by societal norms. Because we have never, the workplace has never normalized how African-American women show up in spaces. And because our leadership has not been normalized, and prototypes are usually centered on two types, white men's leadership style and white women's, because we are female, what happens is they try to fit our leadership style into that of the white woman because of gender. And so when we negate the power and importance of race and the historical and cultural context that race plays in our identity and in our narrative and show up, you lose so much weight of how we show up in spaces. And so people don't think, oh, she might have the same leadership style as a white man. So when you see a white man being assertive, he is praised. But when you see a Black woman, she is angry, right? She is frustrated. She's causing harm because we have not expanded, right? That's why I said we have to decenter prototypical leadership norms and bring normalization to how we show up in spaces, recognizing, and even Black people recognizing we have a modality, we have a show up. So where, no, my communication is direct.
Yes.
No, I am assertive. You see what I'm saying? Language to help define, and then you're not waiting on someone to teach your environment who you are and how you show up. You have the language to do the inner work and to protect your space.
Absolutely. I don't talk often about this because I know it can be really touchy, and I try to be very open about how I approach things. But when I think about the types of teams I've led, I knew, and other women of color have said this too, there is no way to faster kill a Black woman's career than to have a white woman cry.
Yes,
and
tears.
Like, well, what modality is that? What leadership style is that? What is that called?
That's also a defense mechanism for white women. Now, remember, I said earlier, we all have defense mechanisms for how we show up in spaces based on our historical and cultural context. So one of the ways when you look at that, just historical and cultural, that context, that is one of white women's defense mechanisms, is tears, right? That is how they get the rescue. That is how, because of the true womanhood concept with regards to their relationship with power, which is white men, because of that understanding of that hierarchical way of concept with regards to how they show up in their own societal norm.
Correct.
Their own societal norm. Tears was power. Tears is how they got their power. Tears was how they got those issues off of them. So generationally, it has continued, and that has just become a defense mechanism that is used as a way of dealing with fear, dealing with discomfort, and dealing with environment. So that is not our defense. Tears never worked for us historically or culturally, right? But one of our defense mechanisms is a form of confidence and self-reliance, right? But again, ours can also be toxic. You see what I'm saying? So with this understanding of this historical and cultural context, and then me saying, okay, I need this framework. How do I want to show up? Where is the capacity? How do I shift my mindset? How do I want actually intentionally making decisions about what that looks like? It doesn't matter if it's the white woman with tears or the Black woman with self-reliance. There are toxicities in our historical and cultural context that need to be addressed so that we can show up as the best leader.
Yes. When you think about all of that work, and this is one of those conversations that I tread and I touch, I'm gonna keep on touching it. Mm-hmm. Whose job is it then? Who is the onus on, or is it everybody, to then disarm the system that we are now all victim to, essentially, right? We were all victim to a different approach of the systemic racism, sexism, all of it. Whose job is it then to disarm some of those things so that the conversations can be had, so that I can step in my identity confidently and not angrily, mm-hmm. to make sure that I am heard, mm-hmm. and responded to well.
It's all of our responsibilities. It is our responsibility from the rooter to the tiller to do the personal work. And so this is kind of my thoughts around this, right? If we are all doing the identity work, and I believe so much of what we're dealing with societal norms is about capacity, It's about ideologies of dominance. It's about frameworks and understanding of power. If we are all doing our work with regards to who we are and how we show up in spaces, it increases our capacity to deal with other people. That context of emotional intelligence now comes into play, right? Because now, because I understand who I am, I have a different sense of empathy because I am doing the work.
Right.
I have a different capacity about someone else's identity journey because I went on it myself. And so, because I am doing the work, my capacity and my mindset totally shifts because I cannot stay the same and do personal development. You cannot. If you're really doing the mindset work to shift and to become, and you understand the journey, and you understand your lived experience, and you understand the historical and cultural context for yourself, when you see someone else, then you can appreciate their journey. And so I think a lot of the systemic issues is the fact that people are not doing the work for themselves. And as a result of that, they're stuck in their own paradigm. I mean, there is an actual psychological context that we live in our own worlds.
It's the
so we're projecting.
prophecy. Correct.
Correct.
If you anticipate my anger, I can say please and thank you 100 times, and you're still only going to hear angry.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Because my paradigm says this is how this woman is going to act, or this is what that look means, or this is what that feels like. Now you're getting into neuroscience, right? Now you're getting into brain work and patterns. Now you're learning about, okay, this is how the brain protects you. Now we're getting into fight and flight and personal protection and patterns that happen in our brains and how we engage with people. But guess what? That's still identity work. I have to understand the processes of how the brain works in order for me to even take the time to ask myself the question, why did I think that? Why did I do that? What does that mean? Was that my paradigm? Is that really what's being expressed? And so all of us doing this work shifts how we engage with each other, because I'm doing the work and because I now understand, oh, I live in a paradigm. Oh, everybody deals with unconscious bias. Oh, my brain has patterns. Oh, so that's why I continue to think that way. Oh, I don't want to think that way. Oh, synaptic connections. Oh my God, you see what I'm saying? So just you doing this work, it forces you to show up different. Then you can identify systematic systems, right? Then, oh, girl, that's dominance, honey. Oh, that's binary thinking. That means that I have to be wrong in order for you to be right. Oh, are you talking about standards? Oh, honey, you see what I'm saying? Now we have language that everybody has a context around to begin to break down the culture and systems. Now we're dealing with inclusion. Now we're dealing with belonging, not because of forced trainings, but because I am doing personal work that shifts the way that I think and show up in my behavior.
Correct. Having been a DE&I trainer in corporations for years, I am now on the opposite of forced training. I do still think training needs to be done, but even as I reshaped what I show up as a leader, I said, no, this is leadership excellence.
Yes.
This fundamentals of management. This is emotional intelligence crash course.
Yes.
And you start that type of conversation, well, now you have to be personally responsible for more than reciting definitions that I gave, and you pass the quiz and you get the check mark that says you completed unconscious bias training, therefore you're no longer that just means you learned a couple of new words today.
Yes.
But what's your application process tomorrow?
Correct.
One of the other things too, though, thinking about all of this amazing work, there's another lady who I spoke with. She's talking about the neuroscience of diversity at work.
Oh, cool.
What then is the benefit for the people who have benefited from the system to then unlearn and relearn, right? You've now benefited from your intentional incompetence, your intentional lack of awareness. You've now benefited and continue to reap the benefits. What's your motivation?
The motivation now is you even benefit the more, because difference creates what? It's not just inclusivity, and it's not just a diverse workforce. Now you're dealing with this understanding of, ingenuity. Now creativity can be unleashed. Now perspectives can be shared. So you're still benefiting. Your company and your organization is going to be elevated to a totally different level, because now people are bringing their genius to the table. People are bringing their thoughts and their processes in the fullness of who they are to the table. This is the benefit. Your productivity is going to go sky high. Your money is going to go through the roof, right? Research shows us now just adding women to the table exponentially increases your bottom line. So can you imagine allowing people to have their own perspective? And I think it's also too around what that means. And then this conversation of power. It's still your organization. It's still your company. And what's being lost is all of this potential, all of this knowledge, all of this know-how is leaving your organization. And research shows us by 2060, the majority of people who are actually workers will be minority people. So if you don't learn, guess what? You're going to miss out. So yeah, you got power now. Yes, it's benefiting you now. But as time progresses, as people understand that they don't have to have, proximity to whiteness to be successful, when people's knowledge about our diversity and the power and the genius that is in all people and all of humanity, when we really begin to tear down those narratives that makes that binary thinking that you're better or that you know more, when the truth is that's not true. Now we're seeing now with research that African-American women are it's really truly the most educated and the most powerful dynamic in the earth. You need us. You know what I'm saying? So we have to, it does get better. It will continue to elevate. What's going to happen is going to begin to drop. I use this narrative, blockbusters, right? Oh, they was on top for a long time. But when the new thing came and they chose not to have a different conversation, they became extinct. And I think it's going to be the same narrative in corporations.
You're going to be a dinosaur. Yes, that's exactly what you just said. I was reading an article and it talked about not only Blockbuster, but Kodak. Kodak actually created the technology that took them out of business because they didn't think it was important enough to have the conversation.
Correct.
You've now created us because you told us we were not good enough for the workplace. Mm-hmm. So what did we do? We became more educated. We found different ways to win influence. Mm-hmm. We found different ways to create the doors to get us into the same rooms. And now we are even more armed than the people who started the room.
Yes.
You might want to befriend us.
Yes. Because we had to go above and beyond, right? And because, friendships and relationships were the dynamic of the people who were in power and control. Now you have a workforce who is highly intelligent, extremely skilled, because we had to leap over those different types of dynamics in order to even be in the room. So you have powerhouses in your space. And if you don't use them, someone will, and they will leave. And the company is what's actually going to miss out.
Absolutely. I could talk about this all day. I want to go ahead and transition a little bit. Talk to me about the difference between social justice strategy and DE&I expertise and strategy, because I know a lot of people think that there's an overlap. In my opinion, those are two different conversations, but I want to hear from you as well on that.
Because to me, social justice is really about equity, right? The main dynamic for me is equitable conversations that don't necessarily stem from, when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is probably centered more to me on language and understanding context and issues. For me, social justice and a strategist for that is putting and addressing systems and cultures with policies and procedures. I think it's a bigger it's a bigger approach, right? It's a bigger what is it that I want to say? It's a bigger way of addressing an issue than just, okay, I'm training you and teaching you. And I don't want to minimize what DEI does, right? Because it's important. But I think that social justice has a tinge of that politic to it, right? That policy to it, that strategy to support systems that really need to be framed and built so that we can begin to develop what it is and structures that are necessary for the next conversation. And so to me, diversity, equity, and inclusion really is about language. It's about, learning. It's more of an educational tool. And I think social justice is more of a structure tool.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That absolutely does. And I think that's also why when people start talking about diversity, there's a lot of frustration because there's still not a common language for what diversity really should be in the first place.
Right.
And how the workplace should be responding to not only the ask, but the intention behind the work.
Yes.
So I think, yes. And I think that's also why there's still a lot of discord, because is the workplace where you fight this battle, or is this something you take over to your local state representative and say, no, really, this is what's going on, and here's how you should be serving me well.
Yeah. So that structural and that more language and educational, I think that's kind of where they diverge, and when they have a different context, even though I believe they can overlap. I believe language really is important to that structural conversation, understanding what diversity is, understanding what leadership is, understanding what inclusion is, understanding what it means to belong, educating yourself for capacity, right? But to me, the social justice then is the next step. So now how do we create these environments? How do we structurally engage these environments? How do we contend with the attacks that keep us from moving forward in these environments? And what does that look like?
Yes. And then how to approach it, because right now we've got two things going on. We've got the outside in approach and the inside out approach. And there's a point of tension,
yes,
where there is fatigue, where there is resistance to change, because there is so much change going on both sides. And I totally get it. And yet this is how systems are made and created and modified, is the change is going to come from one way, or it's going to implode, which is what I also think we're really seeing, is we're seeing an implode. Right. You might want to make a mad dash for the door, because it's this next generation is holding us accountable in a different way than we've ever been challenged to even respond to or look at the workplace before.
Yeah, and they're having a different experience, right? They have a different experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have a different cultural experience. They have a different historical experience. And that's what I think is the power of the moment. That's, I think, is the power of my conversation around identity-centered leadership, because now we are owning what makes us unique and different. And we're not trying to put people into these boxes and call it unity and call it, productivity, when the truth is, no, I'm being, pushed down. I'm really not sharing. I'm just saying what you're saying. That is not productive. That is not forward moving or engaging. That is not leaning into what's coming. That is not what's going to help us deal with AI. That is not what's going to help us be greater entities in this new space that's showing up. And so this identity work, I think, is a capacity work. You know what I'm saying? It is a mindset work. It is a perspective work, so that when systems begin to shift, I can hear the conversation because I am doing the work, whether I'm a boomer, whether I'm Z, X, Y, L, P, whatever you are. we can come on a level playing field by doing the personal work. Yeah.
One of my fears, though, is the lack of historical context
right
for our younger generation, that they don't understand that we are only you and I, one generation removed from the civil rights movement,
just
2
one.
generations removed from 3 generations
Yes.
from slavery. How do we then encourage that conversation, but also help them have that awareness? I was watching a TikTok, and this young lady, without historical context, said, well, obviously some slaves were happy, because otherwise why would they have continued to be slaves? And the person interviewing her is like, do you think anybody is happy being enslaved? And she was like, that just doesn't make sense. Have a historical context.
Right.
There was no option. There was no, I want to raise my hand and leave the plantation.
Yeah, I want to be beat.
I want to be
work from morning to night.
Right. I want to bear your children in,
like a beast, like I'm an animal. Yes.
Right. They lack that part. And I'm saying, so how do we educate you to this while still motivating you to use your voice in the way we know it can be done? It's almost a lack of wisdom, is what I keep.
I think it goes back to, what I said earlier about this leadership development having an historical and a cultural context, and understanding that we can't move forward without context, right? Okay, so now why do we deal with this? What did happen? What are we shaping? Why did you have that? And I think teaching people how to do ancestry.com on themselves, right? Do the archaeological dig on their own context. Not, you don't have to do it on mine. You don't have to do, I don't have to do it on yours, but really understanding the power and the importance of you being a leader requires you to understand what it means to be your unique individual, and building that context includes your history, includes the history of the people that came before you. And then we independently need to then be advocates for our story with each other. Because I think a lot of times, we don't even know our own story and journey. I have been taught many a workshop and shared things with Black women with regards to their historical context through, understanding the Superwoman syndrome, through understanding conversations around imposter syndrome, through understanding the issues with self-reliance. Just these conversations, things that we have made models of our womanhood, models of our Blackness, right? And so it's going to take not only the people who believe that they are called to speak this truth, then we need to train the next people, right? Then we need to multiply ourselves so that the conversation can be bigger and wider, and so that we can continue this as a norm. But until we change the norm, Sybil, until we normalize this, it's going to take generations. My husband says it all the time. He says, Stephanie, you will begin this work, but this is beyond you. And I'd be like, yeah, I understand that. I said, but the part that I play, I'm going to do my part so that whoever comes behind me has something to stand on to do theirs. And so if we just do our part, I'm going to do my part. Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, however I'm supposed to show up, I'm going to give it 100%, right? And if I do my part and all of us do our part, all of us just do the personal work to grow and to engage, to increase our capacity to understand and to know, I think it'll multiply. Just compound interest, right? Momentum. Compounding. Yes. Momentum.
It's momentum. It's
momentum. Yes.
I want to spend the last few moments, we have not yet talked about your book, but I wanted to spend the last few moments talking about your book, and then also talking about how does one develop or identify or figure out what their leader or leadership blueprint is. But first, Portrait of a Leader book. I want to make sure and talk about that and give space for all that book is, because number one, I love supporting authors of color, because our vantage point is often missed or misinterpreted in mainstream. So I wanted to give space for you to talk more about your book, why you wrote it, and how it's manifested in your work.
Well, my book is really, I'm currently working on it. So I'm working on it so that I can position it. And the more I work on it, Sybil, the more it looks like I'm turning it into a textbook.
And that's okay too.
Like I feel like I'm writing a textbook. But really, it's around my research, and it's centered around the work that I've been doing for the last 10 years with current and emerging leaders. The programs that I've developed over the years, looking at the context of those women and what has shown up in commonality, right? Because my agenda is not to create another prototype. My agenda is to create a framework that people can actually use to develop their own. So that was really, really important to me. So now, what are these competencies and what do they look like, right? Some of them under the identity component of it is, a sense of self, understanding your intersectional complexity, renewing your mind, understanding your belief traditions, right? And I've recognized that over the years with the women who have gone through my programs and have seen themselves move into places of success. And so even in the context of my research, listening to successful women, those things continue to show up. And there's 12 of them that continue to show up. And so my point is, okay, so now we have these competencies. What are the practices? How do I engage them? How do I make them a part of my life, right? And so the book really is a supporter of us building these competencies, taking the sweet time. We got 12 months, 12 chapters, right? Taking your time. Okay, this month I'm gonna focus on the sense of self. There's this beautiful quote, by Shirley Chisholm that says, in context, if I don't remove the stereotypes and tropes that are around me, not just those that are around me, but those that I have of myself. I mean, really think about that. I also have stereotypes and tropes in my own context for my own self, right? So, making that decision, what do I look like? How do I want to show up? Doing that self-awareness work, right? Doing that metacognition, thinking about what I'm thinking about, what has been framed in me, and helping women take their time to go through that journey to build out, because mindset and hard work is not overnight. Personal growth work doesn't just happen because you made a decision you want to do something different, right? It is this beautiful, beautiful process of standing up in yourself and saying, this is who I am. Part of the program that I used to do called In Pursuit of Me, at the end of the program, we had a graduation and the women would give their speech or their creed, and they would share with the audience who they are now, what they look like now, how they want to show up now, what that means now. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, that the book is that tool that women can walk in that journey and make decisions about, this is who I am, and it is well. It is well. Yeah.
I'm excited about the books. That might be a textbook, that might be a study guide, journal for people who need it in bite-sized components.
Yes.
I'm excited about that, the work that you've been doing, the work that you're going to continue to do. How can our listeners, how can our viewers learn more about your amazing work and partnering with you?
Oh, they can reach me on different platforms. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Dr. Stephanie M. Kirkland. You can reach me on Facebook. You can reach out to me via email, identitydynamics1@gmail.com. My website is identitydynamics.net. And just go on this journey with me. I do what I call identity shapers that I post, on Facebook, and I post on LinkedIn, just so people can start the journey, right? Pondering, okay, is this my mindset? Where does the shape need to take place in my identity? And so just being able to give those bite-sized, nuggets. I'm also on Instagram doing the same thing. How do we begin the capacity to say, I need to do something different? And so on those social media platforms, that's what I'm doing. Just kind of giving that little nugget.
Nuggets, little sprinkles.
I'm sprinkling, and make you think, right? Oh, I didn't think of that. And I just see it as an opportunity to increase capacity, because once you reach your capacity point to make a bigger decision, then you show up differently. And you'll say, okay, Stephanie, I need to take a class. So so that's kind of the narrative in the space that I'm in right now. Yeah.
Amazing. Final question that I love to ask all of my ladies. What does leading a limitless life look like for you in this next season?
What does leading a limitless life mean to me? It means freedom to make the choices that I choose to make. To me, that's a limitless life because it is my choice. It is my decision, consequences included, and that I don't have limits. I don't believe that I have limits. I believe that I create them through my capacity, to be quite honest. And as I grow, a limitless life for me is continual growth, continue increasing my capacity, because if I continue to work on me, there is nothing that I cannot obtain. I'm always looking, beginning, as Covey says, beginning with the end in mind. Where is it I'm going? And then asking myself the question that I ask all women, who do you need to become for that? And then reaching towards her, because that her is me. So who do I need to become? Because that limitless is connected to me and no one else.
Yes. Not only who do I need to become, but how will I know when I am now her?
Yes. That's the identity framework. I will know because I see her, and therefore I'll put the things in place to get to her.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That is amazing work. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So glad for you all tuning in today with 10,000 Voices. Dr. Stephanie Kirkland is one of 10,000.
Thank you.